Okay, so, thesis statement. In 2006, the Arctic Monkeys came out with their debut album, Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not. It was met with incredible acclaim and praise from critics and audiences alike, and holds up today as, in my opinion, one of the greatest and most consistent rock albums of all time. However, in the 16 years since this album's release, much like a drug addict, the band has continued to chase, yet never managed to quite attain the same level of quality as these early highs. Now, this is a very simplified version of what you're about to watch, so without further ado, let's get some analysis done on these rock and rollers.
Guys, look at fucking Arctic Monkeys, guys, look, it's Alex Turner, look at those three guys who might not know their names by heart, but it's the fucking Arctic Monkeys.
So, Sheffield-based rock band Arctic Monkeys have recently come out with The Car, an album that I would normally have released a review of on this channel, and believe me, we will get to that. However, I believe in a case like this, it's more sensical to cover the band's history chronologically, because when it comes to this group, I have a lot to talk about and I'd like to make my opinions clear. For some context, the band came together in Sheffield 20 years ago in 2002, starring frontman Alex Turner, who's going to be mentioned a lot today, as well as drummer Matt Helders and bassist Andy Nicholson, who got sick of touring and was later replaced with Nick O'Marley in 2006, right after the release of their debut album. There was also lead guitarist Jamie Cook, another founding member, and these four to this day are the band's lineup. Now, this is only important for their sound because it needs to be emphasized how tight the band was originally, having met at the supple age of merely 7 years old, and it's a tightness that is ever so present in their debut album. So let's talk music now.
We're Arctic Monkeys, this is I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor. Don't believe the hype.
2005 was when the country was first exposed to the Arctic Monkeys to a substantial scale, with their first single, I Bet That You Look Good on the Dance Floor, which shot straight to #1. Although Alex Turner was often compared to Sheffield's Jarvis Cocker, who founded Pulp, here he wasn't doling out social commentary. This single is one boy's ardent gaze on the girl whose stiff shoulders mean she probably can't dance, but whose movements hypnotize him anyway. It's romantic and modern, shy and brash, run through with a rich sense of pop history, with references to electropop and girls named Rio, funk syncopation, and a stark punk riff. When you listen to it, you can't help but just get hyper at how flavorful and energetic it is. Now, this single actually had significant ripple effects for the music industry as a whole, because the Arctic Monkeys were one of the first and most successful bands to release music for free, proving that it was actually a rather smart move as opposed to career suicide, which is what many had seen it to be at the time. And singles such as this aided in launching iTunes, which had only just released a year prior. And it's this legacy that's responsible for Dance Floor being one of the only older tunes from the band that's still a part of their live tracklist. Now, singles aside, the band's first studio album consists of not only a brand new set of songs, but also a handful of fully polished songs from previously available demos that you can hear on their demo album Beneath the Boardwalk. On this project, you can listen to the earliest available versions of tracks like Mardy Bum, Dancing Shoes, and Riot Van.
Next person that fucking throws a can.
This tape of 18 demos were burned onto CDs and given away at their gigs for free. Much like the demo record, though of course not to the same extent, Whatever People Say I Am is greatly assisted by its overwhelmingly raw recording method, a rawness that we unfortunately never see from the band afterwards. Alex Turner sounding so raw adds to the record's aesthetic to such an amazing extent, and complements the groove of songs like Fake Tales of Francisco,
And all the weekend rock stars are in the toilets, practicing their line.
and also that Vampire one so well.
All you people are vampires!
All the tracks on this thing use similar tricks, namely building up a fantastic instrumental, cutting it off and then exploding back in, initiating an incredible rush within the listeners. Even though it is the same trick, this trick is so tasteful and lively. The way the Arctic Monkeys apply their respective skills to the rock and roll genre is pretty flawless, and they take you on a roller coaster-like journey at many points, particularly in tracks like Still Take You Home, which has its mellower moments, but especially the second single, When the Sun Goes Down, which to this day has one of the best song structures the band has ever come out with.
I said, who's that girl there?
alongside a strong lyrical thematic of mystery, and also act as a great example of the band's relationship to Sheffield, which is a bond I don't feel is as prominent nowadays. There isn't quite another relationship in music like this album and Sheffield. The Arctic Monkeys and Sheffield in the 2000s, in my mind, is like the musical version of Newcastle and Alan Shearer, which is a reference I'm sure a lot of this channel's demographic won't understand, but whatever, it's the best one I could think of. Honestly, this album perfectly captures being young in the UK, especially the nightlife. The rowdy nights out, getting smashed in local pubs and bars, rank clubs, drunken scraps, dodgy taxis, the love-hate relationship with your hometown, and making it out of the other end with your best mates with stories to tell for years to come. Guaranteed, since this album came out, almost every British teenager has had a love affair with it at some point. I mean, there's a reason that this is the fastest selling debut album in the UK, which is utterly insane, by the way.
A band from Sheffield who first built a following on the internet are set to have the fastest selling debut album since chart records began.
They've made a classic debut album, you know, and then they're not even out of their teens yet.
A riot van and sparks excitement in the boys.
Riot Van acts as a brilliant transitional piece, halting the rambunctious and bustling vibes of the first half with a more mellowed out and dreamy one. Its lyrics detail the feelings of the band pretty bluntly, without too much care of anything outside of having fun. It's a song that I would revisit a few times in this video essay because of this exact theme. At this point, the record tones down its organised chaos and becomes a whole lot more groovy and controlled. Like in Red Lights Indicate Doors Are Secured, as well as Mardy Bum, I feel being the best examples of this, and a contender for my favourite song the band has come out with. There's also the incredible Perhaps Vampires is a bit strong, but which has so much punch that I can barely stomach just how epic it is. There's also the anthemic From the Rich to the Rubble, which is easily the most obvious description of UK club life, accurately capturing the insane childlike vibes of a drunken 16-year-old at Reading Festival, but it just rocks so goddamn hard. Then we have the infamous closer, A Certain Romance, which is basically the perfect song. It's controlled where it needs to be, in your face where it needs to be, with an out-of-this-world guitar solo, an entrancing beachy sound that returns at a whim as a result of their hypnotizingly brilliant guitar tones, a truly rocking bridge. It's almost meditative how well layered this song is, and to think that this is garage rock? I honestly can't think of an album that does it better. And it's equally crazy that this project, despite being as colourful as it is a debut. I mean, are you joking me? This record is an absolute beauty, a genuine masterpiece that should act as a bar setter for any band or artist that wishes to perform a similar genre. Especially everything after Riot Van. My goodness, it's inspiring to listen to these tracks, and it'll ignite anybody's innate love for music like no other artist can. No matter what mood I'm in, I would never even consider for a second skipping any of these tracks, which is such an achievement, because many albums, despite being really good, are bogged down by a handful of mid or lackluster songs. Speaking of which... So a little under 2 years after the debut, the Monkees came out with their second studio album, and considered by many to be their best. Favourite Worst Nightmare. Whilst the genre is still classified as garage rock, much like the first album, there's an added layer of ambition, some would say, with some other genres such as post-punk revival, indie rock and post-Britpop. It's a lot brighter, a lot faster and a little louder, and also a lot meaner, I feel. It's like if the Smiths had a love child with a grimy garage rock group. Its critical reception also outdid their debut, with more 5-star reviews than you can count. People loved and continue to love this record, and many claim it to be the band's greatest project. But now onto the correct opinion. Me! Do I enjoy this album? You're damn right I enjoy this album. Do I think it's their best album? No. But do I think it holds a candle to the previous one? Well... let's talk about it. So once again, the record opens with a pretty rockin' one, because Brian Storm is the antithesis of all the descriptions I placed upon this album in the previous paragraph. Essentially the debut album under a different coat of paint. A lot darker and a lot louder. It sounds good, but we're also introduced with what I believe to be this album's issues, that make it a mere shadow of its predecessor. The first issue being the lyrics, which are nowhere near as bad as what we get in the future. In fact, I would still say that overall they're rather good, with a lot of standout tracks like Fluorescent Adolescent being just so lovable, or Teddy Picker with its commentary on the music industry. But for a lot of these tracks, such as Brian Storm, although the lyrics aren't bad, there's nothing too interesting either. It's sort of just word Jenga at points, and you can see a similar thing happen in songs like Balaclava. The second, and in my opinion biggest issue with this project is the effects. Like I said before, one of my favourite aspects of that first album was how raw yet contained the recording felt, and how authentic the voice of Turner was. Here, however, it feels as though they're really trying to accentuate Alex's voice and make it seem as epic and bombastic as possible. But for me, it has the exact opposite effect. I understand that it's sort of necessary for the nocturnal theme of the project, and it certainly suits the aesthetic, but that doesn't mean I don't think it would have sounded better with a lot less artificial coating on these vocals. Much like the lyrics, this isn't too big of a problem here, but believe me, in the next album we go over, this complaint will make a return, and a pretty ugly one to boot. Now, Teddy Picker as a song is a pretty interesting one. It sort of behooves you into believing that the band has sold out and gone for a more commercial sound. But then you realise from lyrics like, I'm sorry sunshine, it doesn't exist, it wasn't on the top 100 list, as well as she saw it and she grabbed it and it wasn't what it seemed, the kids will dream of making it, whatever that means. And then you take a big sigh of relief because they haven't sold out. They're making a song about the strive for fame and how empty that can be. They sell out for real later on in their careers, but not quite yet, so that's good. I'd also like to add that Teddy Picker probably has the best solo on this album. It's a really, really bloody cool solo. D is for Dangerous has such a great bass line, my goodness. It's really well laid and representative of a nightmare with how short it is and how abruptly it ends. It's a good track, and I don't want to skip ahead here, but it's almost amazing how this album somehow achieves a perfect 50-50 in terms of the sound of their debut album and the sound of Humbug, their third studio album. The quality of the record also, in my opinion, happens to be somewhere in between those two records. So it's better than Humbug, but not amazing or anything. Still good though. And there are a whole lot of interesting ideas that I'm going to get to here as well. Balaclava is probably the weakest of the first half of this record, but still pretty impressive in many ways. The outro is really great, the tune is relatively dynamic, and the drums sound good. Favourite Worst Nightmare is really carried by its bass lines though, which is something I'm noticing as I re-listen to it, just how pivotal of a role Nick O'Malley is playing here. The fact that it's the weakest track of this half should display that even though I'm not as optimistic as the first record, I still like Favourite Worst Nightmare, and I think a lot of its weakest moments are still pretty alright. And I can also very much appreciate the experimentation. To go from the worst track of the first half to probably the best one. I don't have much to say about Fluorescent Adolescent other than I absolutely love it. And I don't think I would trust any human who doesn't, because it's just so fundamentally lovable. Only Ones Who Know is sort of the riot van of this record, and it's okay, but not as good in my opinion. There's no cool and dreary solo this time, the chords are pretty basic, and the slide guitar is a tad too sleepy for my tastes. Although, once again, I know it's for the atmosphere, it is what I'd expect from an album art like the one we have. Do Me a Favor is the first track where Alex Turner's voice actually bothers me, because I really like the instrumental, I really like the lyrics which detail a breakup, but uniquely from the perspective of the one who's actually done wrong and knows that they've done wrong. The structure is fantastic, but there isn't any oomph in these vocals like there was in that previous record. It feels like Alex Turner is almost talking loudly over this rather than actually singing. And the weird, dreary vocal effects don't work for me either. I just really wish the vocals stayed the exact same as they did previously. It did not need to be fixed or changed. It was already perfect. The raw recording is exactly what suits Alex Turner's voice, and his lackadaisical energy similarly permeates the next track, This House is a Circus, which sounds so good. The guitar tones are incredible, the build-ups are amazing, but Alex Turner sounds like he's drunkenly rambling over it. It's just so frustrating because I know he could do so much better with more energy and fewer effects, which is something you're going to hear me say a lot throughout this video. That being said, I don't know many others who have this same issue with Turner's delivery. Perhaps by releasing this video I'll find someone who agrees with me. Don't worry, I still do enjoy these songs and they bang on my playlist for sure. I just think they could be so much better, whereas a lot of whatever people say I am is already pretty flawless. The song beautifully transitions into If You Were There Beware, which once again sounds incredible and the way it transitions is sick. But once again, I really wish the whole package came together in a way that made more sense thematically. The Bad Thing is the first Arctic Monkeys song that I despise. and to this day, it remains one of their absolute worst attempts at music. Seriously, this track is absolutely, it's just such irredeemable trash. Garbage, embarrassing, a stain upon this otherwise fantastic album. Fun little story, the band really didn't want this on their album. It was just Alex Turner who insisted upon it. They eventually met in the middle and left it on the album under the condition that they would never perform it live. And that was a decision that Alex Turner ended up actually regretting. It genuinely brings this album down a peg because it displays to me that nowhere near as much care was put into it than their previous works. To allow such a stinker to be deemed finished and acceptable material is a genuine offense to this band and everything they've stood for so far. Unfortunately, I see the bad thing as something of the beginning of the end for this band, but alas, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Old Yellow Bricks is okay, but I have absolutely nothing but positive things to say about 505. I mean, need I say anything about this closing track? This is every 14-year-old girl's crying song. The whole country already knows it and loves it. It's impossible to be cynical about it, in my opinion. It's by far the best song on the album and is, in my opinion, what the whole thing should have been. It perfects the style that these guys were going for on this record. Let's move on swiftly to Humbug, which I've been itching to get at. After another 2 years, we get the Monkees' third studio album, Humbug, committing fully to the psychedelic stoner sounds that were dabbled with in the previous album. It's a lot less rocky than their other projects, introducing more percussion instruments like xylophones and glockenspiels, with a slower, more hushed approach to the vocals, and a departure from angstier lyrics, leaning towards a more metaphorical and analogy-filled group of words. Now this works really well sometimes, the best example being my favourite song from the record, Cornerstone, which by far has the most interesting premise. However, it might not be the best sign that the most different song from the rest of the record is my favourite, as Cornerstone is one of the only tracks on this thing that I think was actually written in the major key. But despite the occasional dodgy lyric, I quite like the bulk of these lines and I'm a fan of this crazed concept. I think that production-wise, the recording is pretty impeccable, and the guitar tones and layering work really well in tracks like My Propeller, but especially Crying Lightning, which has some brilliant twisted guitars. Though I do think the mixing could use some work. The vocals are rather quiet and drowned by the booming drum sets and hi-hats, which is also a glaring issue in The Secret Door, which once again has great ideas but falls flat on the execution side of things. It might be attempting for that psychedelic sound by being as chaotic and flowery as possible, but it's not something that works for Alex Turner at all. Alex Turner's lyrical shortcomings and weird vocal effects return yet again, but in a far worse manner for songs like Dangerous Animals, which has an incredible riff and instrumental that truly gets brought to life near the end, as it explodes into a dark and tribal vibe indicative of the animalistic theme of the track, but for whatever reason, Turner deems it necessary to spell out the title like we're in year 3. T-A-N-G-R-O-U-S. And it totally pulls me out of the experience, ruining the feeling of consumption that I should be feeling. There are some pretty dumb lyrics sprinkled here and there, which are sometimes placed in such horrible places that I can't help but be annoyed by them. Lyrics like, which is just so weird and random, but it's the final line of Potion Approaching, which had such an amazing and explosive bridge/outro. But it's cheapened by that really unnecessary and weird line. Much like the other ones, the closer is one of the best on the album, because the Jeweler's Hands has some amazing effects and the percussion comes in full force. It's also Alex Turner's best vocal delivery because it actually feels as though it's part of the music, as opposed to being disjointed and out of place like it does in literally every other song. It's also the only one that fully commits to the psychedelic genre in my opinion, and that's what really gets me about Humbug. The band is still as tight and amazing as they were when they came together, but Alex Turner seems to want something different from what we're presented with. Alex Turner is the weakest link here by far, and from now on this is going to be something of a common theme for the rest of the video. So without further ado, let's move on to Suck It and See, which will be a bit of a shorter section.
3, 2, 1.
I don't have much to say about the next 3 albums. They're all pretty bland, and an utter shell of the music that was once made by this band. Songs like Brick by Brick and Don't Sit Down Cause I've Moved Your Chair, which were the 2 singles for this record, are some of their worst songs. Brick by Brick especially is comparable to Imagine Dragons in terms of quality. I hate this song so much, it's my least favourite Arctic Monkeys song by far. Now that's not to say that this album doesn't have its high points. She's Thunderstorms is a brilliant and sunny opener with a retro feel. A lot of the hooks and chori are pretty great, but it's just the verses that pale in comparison for me. Alex Turner flexes his songwriting chops in a manner far more impressive than Humbug in my opinion, which can be shown off in tunes like Black Treacle for example, which details a relationship with a hardcore drug addict, as well as Hellcat Spangled Shalala, which reads lyrically as an actually rather impressive bit of poetry. With more interesting melodies and instrumentals, I feel like this could truly be one of their better records. Unfortunately, when it's not cringe garbage like Brick by Brick, it just decides to play it painstakingly safe and simple with an aura of commercialism surrounding it, sort of becoming the very subject of a track like Teddy Picker. In terms of interesting instrumentation, like I said, there isn't much on display here, but I think Library Pictures has a killer bass line and I really dig how short and explosive it is. I also like Piledriver Waltz, and once again the closer is probably the best on the record. Much like Humbug, this is a weird one. I kinda like it, but it's all just so shallow to me. It's definitely the band's least ambitious record, and once again it's clear that they're capable of so much more. It doesn't really seem as though Alex Turner is trying despite how great of a songwriter he is at points. Although I will say that his songwriting is nowhere near as impressive on the next record. To be straight up, AM is one of the lamest rock records of the 2010s. With every Arctic Monkeys release, the energy has been on a constant downward slope, and we're losing what made them so exciting to begin with. The speed, subversion, and catchy hooks that were ever so present not so long ago are nowhere to be seen in AM, which is so cold, so barren, and so tame. If anything, I like this cover art quite a lot. The contents of this record are really boring, with no memorable hooks or lyrics or catchy verses. Yes, including Do I Wanna Know, which is one of the most overrated songs from the 2010s in my opinion. It doesn't really rock, the lyrics are really weird, but I kinda like it. I understand why it's popular and I enjoy the bubbling ending. I just think it's overrated and that the band has so much more better songs. There's no energy or passion in this thing, and thus a complete failure to facilitate any memorable riffs or instrumentation. Even in their previously lacking albums, there was always a riff or bass line that shone through and made the experience at least a little interesting. This is just commercial music, but somehow even worse, because they can't even replicate the same catchiness that comes with said music. Songs like Are You Mine are pretty much just carbon copies of Do I Wanna Know, and songs like One for the Road and Arabella make Humbug sound hardcore and thrifty, because the chorus is awful for Arabella, completely ruining the groovy and nocturnal verse melody.
She's got a Barbarella silver swimsuit.
Even number one party anthem, to my utter dismay, is an ironically titled and disappointing snooze fest, much like 80% of the track list, which is immensely unsatisfying. I do kind of enjoy Why Do You Only Call Me When You're High a little bit because it's short and sweet, but crushingly, the closing track might be the worst song on AM, a total juxtaposition to every other Arctic Monkeys project where the last song is pretty much always like the best one. It's literally the exact same thing that we've heard 11 times before it. It's the most generic love song I've ever heard in my life, the lyrics are really boring, and Alex Turner is horrifically underperforming and monotone. Which he is for every song here, by the way. Much like Suck It and See, this album takes zero risks, there's nothing unique about it, and it's totally safe, generic, and sold out slop. By far the worst album so far, and I have no idea why it did so well. So, Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino is the only Arctic Monkeys album that's actually better than the one that came before it, because this is a couple levels above AM in my opinion, although that really isn't saying much. Sort of on par with Suck It and See, I suppose, in my eyes. At its best, there's a Frank Sinatra sort of feeling with some really exciting lo-fi sounds and some mind-bogglingly beautiful production and instrumentation, such as the first track, Star Treatment, which is just so pleasing to the ears. The piano on the album is so playful and melodic, such as on the second track, 1 Point Perspective, which is another totally lovable one. The lyrical content on this record is so much better than AM, and even if Alex Turner doesn't have the best voice for this narrative genre of singing, not only is it still pretty good and tolerable, but it's at the very least a risk. It's something out of the ordinary, and I really appreciate that. I love the sound of this record instrumentally. The drums and guitars are so crisp and growly. The title track's hook is really weird and clunky.
Tranquility base. Hotel and
And in that same vein, the whole project, I think, has a slight issue with structure, insofar as every song feels like an intro. There's not much build-up, and sometimes the mixing and layering can be pretty messy, like in Golden Trunks, despite its great vocal harmonies. Unfortunately, once you're through the first half of this thing, there's not much else to offer. I enjoy She Looks Like Fun's heaviness and the weird groove and transitions. I enjoyed the weird psychedelic feel that came with the world's first ever monster truck front flip. Once again, however, the biggest issue with this album is Alex Turner himself. There's a lack of rhythm, weirdly enough. He tends to just say words lazily over these dreary and fantastic instrumentals, sort of masking his limitations via pseudo-satirical theming. I remember thinking at the end of this album, yeah, that was solid and I'm glad they tried something new, but I sure do hope this isn't the sound that they choose to commit to now, because it doesn't work too well for the Arctic Monkeys, despite having a lot of brilliant aspects to it. However, well, I think we all know what comes next. So this was all this video was originally supposed to be about, but as it turns out, I have a lot to say about the Arctic Monkeys and I had to extend this video's runtime just a little. So if we're being sarcastic and facetious, just consider everything up until this point a mere intro for this review. And I'd like to start said review by saying, can we all agree that these guys aren't a rock band anymore? I mean, I guess at a stretch there are some mild swaths of orchestral rock thrown into these last two albums, but primarily, Alex Turner seems to have diverted his attention to a more baroque and poppy form of instrumentation, opting for more of a lounge genre, so to speak.
What is a bitch in a miniskirt? A man in his feelings with bitterness. What is a woman that really hurt?
Now, the last time they attempted this, the album that they came out with was mid, and we obviously just went over that. So you'd assume that the band's second attempt at a similar style would result in a more impressive and experienced result. But to my utter dismay, this project is their worst album yet. Now, what's the most glaring issue with the car, you may ask? Well, much like the album cover and title, it's really boring, and the main reason for this once again is the exact same thing that held back Tranquility Bass, Alex Turner's vocal performance.
I'll admit it's elaborate for a waking thought.
At least Tranquility Bass had an underlying aura of self-awareness as to how ridiculously flamboyant the whole thing was, with subtle nods and humorous undertones. There doesn't seem to be a hint of irony here. It's pretty clear that Turner is trying his damnedest. In terms of positives, the best thing about this record is once again also the best thing about the last one. It sounds grand and beautiful, like genuinely beautiful, but I don't like it. The scale is grand, the budget is clearly huge, the production is impeccable, the synths are endearing, and the bass is booming. When rock instruments are used in songs like I Ain't Quite Where I Think I Am and Sculptures of Anything Goes, it worked really well. But despite all of that, I just don't like it. At all. From such incredible pacing and ecstatic moments in their debut, to this, where there's constant build-ups for choruses that just don't happen in tracks like the aforementioned I Ain't Quite Where I Think I Am, like a particularly satisfying sneeze that just dissipates before you let it all out. There's not really an ending to any of these tunes either. The instrumental either ends abruptly or with a trickle rather than a bang. The lyrics are not for me, but that's not to say that they're necessarily bad. I can certainly see the appeal in them, but maybe they just sound less impactful to me because Alex Turner sings them like he's doing a bad impression of David Bowie. His vibrato is amateurish, his pitch is off-key a lot of the time, and his delivery is just rather stale and boring. Now granted, he's never actually had the most impressive singing voice, but that didn't matter for the rock and roll genre that made him so popular to begin with. His bombastic and excited voice was perfect for something like I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor, where you wouldn't want some crazy show-offy singer vibe. Like, imagine if Rihanna sung that song, it wouldn't work at all. It doesn't seem to me as though Alex Turner is fully aware of his limitations, in my opinion. There's no excuse. To be honest, it's a good thing that I had to talk about the other records, because I can't talk about this one for 8 minutes. It's just so uninteresting, and it's an odd complaint, but it's actually too consistent. It's too consistent. Really one note the whole time. All the songs blend together in a way that sounds way too similar and poetically pretentious. Or pretentiously poetic, I'm not too sure what one to... You know what I mean. To be frank, I don't like Alex Turner. I think he's a really boring individual and a horrible frontman for the Arctic Monkeys. I do not understand the appeal surrounding this man at all. I dig his old vibe, I can certainly get behind his naughty's attitude and personality, but he was actually cool and seemed to enjoy what he was doing, and genuinely be passionate about the genre that suits him and his band. Let's take his MasterCard Album of the Year award for AM, which by the way is total bollocks, that album sucked. But whatever, that speech he gave, it's just cringe, man.
Demands it adheres to some of its rules.
On that note, they're just so boring live. They had so much energy in the early days, but now they absolutely have zero stage presence. Say what you want about the music of bands like the 1975 or the contentious character of Matty Healy, but I think they're the quintessential example of how to do live performances in the modern day. Matty Healy is a man with a really powerful stage presence. He was born for that role. Alex Turner clearly has the talent and skill to make great music and to be a great performer, but for some inexplicable reason, he just doesn't want to. Now don't get me wrong, I think in many ways it's admirable the position that the band is in. They're one of the few musicians who are under absolutely no pressure from their record label due to the extreme position of influence they've made it to. They truly are just doing what they want, feeling free to experiment with whatever genre they like, but I can't help but hope they eventually revert back to what they started with, at least slightly, because perhaps a blend of this lounge pop and their hardcore garage rock might actually be an interesting one. Heck, we hear glimpses of it on the Cars' Best Moments. I know they have it in them, but when you listen to how they perform the old songs that they still do live, you can see Alex Turner doesn't give one about his roots. Take 505 for example. This is how he performed it in the noughties.
When you look at me like that, my darling, what did you expect?
And then this is how he performs it now.
I'm going back to 505. If it's a 7-hour flight or a 45-minute drive, my imagination, you're waiting, lying on your side with your hands between.
Like, what's he doing? Why is he being all sexy with it? It doesn't work at all. It's nowhere near as cathartic as it should be. It ruins the whole point of the explosive burst of emotion after such a tense build-up. Why does he insist upon this weird, fake deep voice and awful vibrato thing that he's going for that regularly goes off beat and off key? It's only made that much more frustrating because he can sing. We've seen him do it. But he's consciously choosing to sound like garbage. I'm giving The Car by Arctic Monkeys a 3 out of 10. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, all likes, comments, and subscriptions are very much appreciated. Much love to you all!